Hi, everyone. It's A Ticket to Christ. Thank you for tuning back in. We're looking at strength in the Lord, and we are talking about people who were just strong in their faith in God. And it wasn't that their lives were cushy or that things were easy. In fact, it was quite opposite. They went through a lot of challenges and persevered through the end. And we're looking at Jacob. Jacob, the patriarch, right? It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob I have a soft spot for Jacob. There are very few people in the Bible I get emotional about in the Old Testament, and Jacob is one of them. There's just something about Jacob. I just think that he has had to fight so hard all of his life, and here we see him in Genesis 47, verse 7, and this is when we see, you should read the story of the account of his life when he was born. Of course, he was born a twin. Esau came out first, then he came out. And so according to that custom, the firstborn was the one who would inherit the father's wealth and blessings. Well, Esau did not value and have a God consciousness. He was worldly, and Jacob, in seeing that, tricked him, and or somebody could say took advantage of the moment, or I wouldn't say took advantage of the moment. I think saw that Esau wasn't valuing something really valuable and used an opportunity to make a deal with him. And he sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. And of course, Esau, it seems to me, didn't take his word seriously. So he thought everybody else was like that. But Jacob wasn't like that. And so when it was time to inherit the blessing, Esau didn't think anything twice of it to try to go get the blessing after he already sold his birthright. So he sold his right to get that blessing anyway. But Jacob used connivingness to steal the blessing from him with the help of his mother. And as a result of that, it put a huge wedge between him and Esau forever. They were at each other's throats from that point on. Of course, Esau was very hurt and enraged, and Jacob ended up having to run for his life. And so he ran to his uncle Laban, and the uncle Laban took advantage of him, did to him what he did to Esau, which was took advantage of him. First of all, gave him the wrong wife, Leah as first wife, the wrong sister. He had asked for Rachel. He tricked him and gave him Leah. And then he had to work 7 years for his wife. And then after that, 7 more years for Rachel. And then he tried to leave when his, I guess, nephews or cousins, they would be cousins since it's his uncle, started to have a bad attitude toward him because he was being very successful and they felt he was taking over, their wealth. And so he ran with his wives, and Laban pursued him and made mischief against him, but God interceded for Jacob. And then we see him wrestling with God, just really surrendering everything, and God changing his name to Israel. And then him heading back to, Canaan. And from there, just the challenges that he had with his 12 children, including one son being sold by his brothers to the Midianites to slavery. And the Midianites sold him to the Egyptians, I guess. And the rest is history. So here we have Jacob realizing that Joseph is still alive. He came back with the other of Joseph's brothers, and here Jacob is presenting his dad Joseph. I'm sorry, not Jacob. Joseph is presenting his dad Jacob to Pharaoh, And in Genesis 47, verse 7, it says, "And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh." And so what jumps out at you about Jacob here? What do you get from him? What are you seeing? What I get from here is a dignity. I'm seeing a quiet dignity coming from Jacob. And a humility, in realizing that he had a hard life. He went through some tough days. And in comparison to his, Abraham, I think Abraham died at 175. I don't know what age Isaac died at, but I do know before Abraham, people lived a lot longer. I think Terah, his father, lived to 200 and something, for example. So, I see the humility of Jacob here. And also his understanding his identity. Yesterday we talked about understanding your identity, and because you have that understanding of who you are in Christ, that is where your strength comes from. It comes from the Lord, and we see him have that understanding. How do I know that? Verse 10, it says, "And Jacob blessed Pharaoh." So if you're the one doing the blessing, it means that you're the one who is the authority in the conversation. You're the more spiritual one. You're the elder, and so it didn't say "and Pharaoh blessed Jacob." It says "and Jacob blessed Pharaoh." That Jacob is the one who is represented, the one and only God in this conversation, in this meeting here, and he is the one that God anointed and chose. And so he is the one who is the righteous man, the elder, the more, how do I want to put it? The one with the authority in this conversation. Even though technically, from the world's point of view, Pharaoh would have been the one with the authority. He's the Pharaoh, the head of all of Egypt, which was the most, I guess it was the superpower at the time. And here, looking at it, would be Jacob. What did Jacob own? He owned he did own a lot of sheep and goats and cattle and livestock, but they were living in Egypt, which Pharaoh was ruling over. So from the world's point of view, you would have thought Pharaoh is the one who was the more important person. But from God's point of view, it was Jacob. And because of his identity as chosen by God, And so from there, we see, Jacob was able to enjoy all of his children before he died in Goshen, in Egypt, and then he died. And he made a request for his bones to be taken back to Canaan to be buried with Abraham and Isaac and their wives, and Leah, his first wife, the one who he hadn't asked for, but ultimately she was the mother of most of his children. So she, in a way, earned the distinction of being the one to be buried with him. And but we see Jacob being faithful all the way to the end of his life as well, and was strong enough to persevere through the challenges of life. And many of the challenges he faced, as I mentioned earlier, were bad decisions he made. Maybe he could have done things very differently with Esau, so that there wasn't that level of hatred that built up in Esau to the point where it went through generations, right? And just really having a deeper sense of trusting in God to work that out. God was the one who chose him, because God had said the older would serve the younger while they were still in Rebecca's womb. And so God would have worked it out. But again, people taking things into their own hands, it will make a mess, So one of the things about being strong in the Lord is even when you make mistakes, bad decisions, bad choices, and you cause turmoil, like what happened with Jacob, God is still able to work it out. So persevere like what Jacob did. He took his blows, he took his punishment, he cried out to God, he relied on God, and ultimately prevailed, And none of the 12 children died. All of them grew up and were strong. And they're called the 12 tribes. They were the heads of these 12 tribes and were the ones who would raise those tribes up in the Lord. So Jacob, I think, is an incredible person to also study through when you're looking at finding strength in the Lord. So those are my insights. I hope it's given you a lot of food for thought, blessing you in some small way as well, beloved. Have a great day.